The movement is not built on unanimous certainty. It is built on a commission handed to a group that includes people who are not sure.
Yeah. And that quote right there is, it's just this massive, unresolved elephant in the room of Matthew chapter 28.
It really is. Welcome to this deep dive. Today we have a producer briefing document covering, one of the most heavily scrutinized ancient texts in human history.
Right. And within the first minute here, we have to lay out the biggest aha moment that's just, well, hiding in plain sight in this text.
Yeah, because the most arresting detail of this entire chapter, it actually isn't a supernatural event.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not an angel descending from the sky, and it isn't a massive earthquake either.
Exactly. The most staggering detail is the fact that some of the inner circle of disciples, like the surviving founders of this movement, they actually still doubted, even as they physically bowed down to the risen Jesus.
Right. They're literally bowing down, and they're not sure. And the text, it just completely leaves this doubt unresolved.
Which is wild. And that brings us to the mission of our deep dive today, because we are going to entirely bypass simple theology.
Yeah, theology is off the table for this one.
Right. Our focus today is strictly on the historical context, the intense political tension in first-century Judea, and just the raw, on-the-ground drama presented in this text.
Because we really need to look at this as a historical document. It's recording this incredibly volatile sequence of events.
Yeah, where political cover-ups and physical exhaustion just completely collide with a sweeping global mandate.
Exactly. And to understand how this movement culminates in such a stark admission of doubt, well, you have to start at the beginning of the chapter.
Right, because the focus there is surprisingly on physical, verifiable evidence.
It is. It's not about immediate spiritual revelation at all. The narrative totally grounds itself in material reality before it ever attempts to address the metaphysical stuff.
So, let's set that scene. The text specifies it is before sunrise on the first day of the week.
Right. Very early.
And two women, Mary Magdalene and another woman identified only as the other Mary, they approached the burial site.
Yeah, and based on the historical context provided in the text, we're looking at a rock-cut burial chamber sealed with a rolling stone.
Oh, a rolling stone.
Yeah, and this specific style of tomb architecture, it was well documented in first-century Judea, but it was generally reserved for families of significant means.
Like wealthy families.
Exactly,
Right.
which aligns perfectly with the detail from the preceding chapter. It notes that Joseph of Arimathea, who was a wealthy council member, had donated his own newly cut tomb.
So the text is painting a picture of a substantial, highly visible piece of real estate.
Yes, it is not some forgotten grave in an anonymous field.
Right. And it is heavily fortified. The text places Roman guards at the site.
Which is a huge detail.
It is. These are elite soldiers. It's a security detail specifically posted to prevent, any kind of physical tampering or disruption by the followers of the executed man.
Right, and the presence of those guards is a really critical geopolitical detail. I mean, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, he had the explicit authority and the political motive to secure that location.
Because the local leaders asked him to, right?
Yeah, the chief priest had previously warned his administration that the disciples might attempt to stage a resurrection claim by basically just removing the body.
Wow, so it was a known security threat.
Exactly. Pilate's primary directive from Rome was to maintain order in what was a historically rebellious province. So deploying elite troops for crowd control at a high-profile gravesite, that was just a standard administrative maneuver to prevent civil unrest.
Okay, so the atmosphere is quiet, it's before dawn, and the guards are holding their perimeter.
Right.
And then the text introduces absolute chaos. A violent earthquake strikes the area, and an angel descends.
And the description here is so vivid.
It is. The text says the angel's appearance was blazing like lightning, with clothes white as snow.
Just an overwhelming visual.
Yeah, and this figure effortlessly rolls the massive stone away from the entrance and simply sits on it.
Sits right on the stone.
Right. And the elite Roman guards, the ones deployed specifically to maintain order, they experience a total psychological collapse. The text literally says they shake and become like dead men.
Which is just a profound disruption of the martial order Rome imposed on the region. Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
The very symbols of imperial security are just totally incapacitated by sheer terror. And once the guards are neutralized, the angel addresses the women directly.
Right, and the message delivered is really concise.
Very. It's basically, Jesus is not here, he is risen, and they're instructed to go tell the disciples to meet him in Galilee.
But looking closely at Matthew 28:6, though, the angel's phrasing is just fascinating to me. The quote is, "He is not here, for he is risen, just like he said. Come, see the place where the Lord was lying."
Yeah, that invitation is key.
Right. I mean, I have to point out that invitation, "Come, see the place," it sounds way more like a crime scene investigator inviting witnesses to inspect physical evidence.
Rather than demanding blind belief.
Exactly. It's not a religious figure demanding unquestioning faith. It's an invitation to look at the data.
Framing it as an empirical invitation really captures the tone of the text perfectly.
Hmm.
I mean, the angel does not demand they accept the resurrection based solely on his blazing appearance or, his verbal declaration.
He points them to the empty space.
Yes, the empty rock-cut chamber is offered as a material baseline. The text is emphasizing inspection over immediate face here.
Which is so unusual for an ancient text.
It really is. The women are told to essentially process the data of the empty space before they carry the message forward.
So they are being asked to verify the claim with their own eyes. And then the text notes that the women flee the burial site in this volatile mix of fear and joy.
Which is a completely understandable reaction.
Totally. I mean, the psychological overload of seeing neutralized Roman soldiers, a supernatural entity, and an empty tomb, it just sends them running.
Yeah, and while they are running, they encounter Jesus on the road.
And their reaction is immediate and deeply physical. They fall down and grab his feet as they worship him.
Right, and the tactile nature of that encounter really anchors the narrative. Holding his feet proves this is not some spectral vision or an ethereal ghost,
Yeah, it's a physical, bodily interaction.
Exactly. Furthermore, the dialogue in that moment is remarkably subdued.
Well,
Jesus doesn't deliver this sprawling theological discourse to explain the mechanics of what just happened.
he keeps it strictly logistical.
Yeah, he simply reinforces the angel's instruction. Tell the others to meet him in Galilee.
Okay, so the women head off to deliver this logistical message, but this leaves a massive, glaring loose end back at the burial chamber.
Oh, a huge one.
Right. What happens to elite Roman soldiers when they fail at a highly sensitive crowd control assignment? And, how do the local power brokers avoid a deadly administrative crisis?
Well, the terror-stricken guards eventually recover enough to flee the site, but their failure triggers an immediate high-stakes crisis for the local authorities in Jerusalem.
So they don't go to Pilate first?
No, the guards actually bypass their Roman commanders and report directly to the chief priests.
Let's pause and unpack who these chief priests actually were, because I think the general assumption is that they were merely spiritual leaders.
Right, people think of them just in a religious context.
Exactly. But in first century Jerusalem, they were functioning as a massive political apparatus, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They were the ultimate local power brokers. The chief priests belonged to the Sadducean aristocracy.
So they had real money and influence.
Yes. They controlled the temple treasury, which functioned somewhat like a central bank for the entire region, and they managed the daily governance of Judea under Roman oversight.
Which means their authority was completely dependent on maintaining peace for the empire.
Entirely dependent on it. So when the guards report the catastrophic failure at the tomb, the chief priests convene an emergency session with the elders of the Sanhedrin, the supreme ruling council.
Because if these guards fell asleep or ran away and lost a high-profile political prisoner's body, wouldn't a historically brutal governor like Pilate just execute them immediately?
Oh, without a doubt.
So how on earth could local religious leaders fix a military failure of this magnitude?
Well, that is the exact administrative nightmare the Sanhedrin was facing. Under Roman military law, abandoning a post or sleeping on guard duty was a capital offense.
So it's life or death for these guards.
Exactly. This was not a theological debate for the council. It was a matter of life and death and a massive threat to their own fragile political stability.
Right, because if Pilate found out...
If Pilate discovered that a highly sensitive security detail had been compromised, the resulting crackdown would have been swift and violent.
Okay, looking at verses 12 and 13, I just can't help but see this entire emergency session as a first-century crisis PR meeting.
That's exactly what it is.
The priests deploy this highly pragmatic strategy. They pull from the temple treasury and pay a massive bribe, the text says a large sum of money, to the soldiers.
Right, hush money.
Yeah, and in exchange, the soldiers agree to distribute a very specific counter-narrative. That the disciples came by night and stole the body while the guards were sleeping.
It's pure spin.
It is. And the incredible candor here is that the empty tomb wasn't actually disputed by the authorities. They don't try to claim the body is still there.
No, they don't even try.
They acknowledge the physical reality of the empty tomb, but they just manufacture a spin to explain it away. I mean, this has to be the earliest documented attempt to manage the resurrection story as a political liability rather than engage it as a truth claim.
It really is. The text reveals that the empty tomb is basically a shared baseline fact across all factions. The ideological war is fought entirely over controlling the narrative of why the chamber is empty.
Wow. Yeah.
And the second half of the Sanhedrin's strategy is just as revealing as the financial bribe.
The part about the governor?
Exactly. The priests promise the soldiers that if this fabricated report reaches the governor, they will persuade the governor and keep the soldiers out of trouble.
Persuade the governor is such a heavy phrase. I mean, you don't just casually promise to talk a Roman prefect out of executing his own soldiers unless you have deep established leverage.
Right. It reveals the existence of direct back channels to Pilate's administration. The text definitely implies a highly cooperative governance machinery between the local aristocracy and the imperial occupier.
It's the same system they used for the trial.
Exactly. This is the exact same political machinery the Sanhedrin had deployed just days earlier to secure the crucifixion order in the first place.
Right.
They had negotiated the arrest, managed the trial, and pressured a reluctant Pilate into approving the execution. And now they are pulling those same political levers to contain the chaotic aftermath.
So while the religious elites are frantically throwing silver at Roman guards to control the political narrative in the capital, the disciples do the exact opposite of what you'd expect a new political movement to do.
Yeah, they completely abandoned Jerusalem.
Right. The text states that the 11 surviving disciples travel north to Galilee to a specific mountain that Jesus had directed them to.
Which is not a short trip.
No. To put that into perspective, the journey from Jerusalem north to Galilee covers roughly 100 miles on foot. In the ancient world, that is days of grueling travel.
It's a massive commitment.
It is. I keep looking at the strategic decision like, why walk 100 miles away from the capital city just when the situation is reaching a boiling point?
It goes against all conventional wisdom.
Exactly. If you are launching a massive movement, conventional wisdom says you stay at the center of the political world. But this feels like a deliberate, calculated withdrawal.
How so?
Well, they are returning to the region where Jesus first gathered followers, where they fished the same lake, and where they drew those massive early crowds. It brings the entire narrative full circle, far away from the corruption and the bribes of the Sanhedrin.
That's a great point. And the physical reality of a 100-mile trek, it really underscores the commitment of the 11 survivors, especially considering they are operating under the lingering trauma of the recent execution.
Yeah, they must have been exhausted.
Absolutely. Furthermore, some scholars believe the text suggests a very deliberate literary and historical framing by the author here, because the destination is not just anywhere in Galilee, it is a mountain.
And a mountain setting for a climactic gathering.
Yeah.
That immediately brings Mount Sinai to mind.
Right. For a first-century Jewish audience, the parallel would be completely unmistakable.
Wow, yeah.
Framing the climax of the narrative on a mountain heavily echoes Moses receiving the law on Sinai. The text may suggest it signals that a new, foundational mandate is about to be delivered to the people, mirroring the historical origins of the nation of Israel.
So the geographical shift from the corrupted urban center of Jerusalem to this pristine elevation of a Galilean mountain, it serves as a visual reset for the movement.
Exactly, a total reset.
Okay, so we have the 11 surviving members of the inner circle. They have made this grueling, dangerous trek. They're standing on this mountain in Galilee. And it's right there, at the absolute peak of the narrative, that the text drops its most startling revelation.
Yeah, we finally arrive at verse 17. The text simply reads, "When they saw him, they bowed down to him, but some doubted."
But some doubted.
Just incredible.
Sitting with the sheer honesty of that phrase is staggering. We teased this at the very beginning of the deep dive, but exploring the psychology of it now, it really changes everything.
It does.
I mean, they are physically bowing down in worship, but internally, the hesitation is still present right there in the room, in the minds of the people at the very center of it all.
And the author's choice here is what makes the text so endlessly fascinating. The text does not identify the doubters by name.
They stay anonymous.
Right. It does not offer a theological explanation to resolve their hesitation in the following sentences either. And crucially, there is absolutely no punishment or reprimand issued for this doubt.
Nothing.
For an audience fully expecting a triumphant, ironclad vindication scene to cap off the story, this unresolved uncertainty lands like a dropped blade. It shatters the artificial expectation of perfect, unified heroic conviction.
Looking at it from a human perspective, this is either the strangest leadership decision in ancient literature, to willingly include the vulnerability of your founders in your primary text, or it is the most honest portrait of how consequential movements actually begin.
Absolutely.
They are staring at a man they watched die, cognitive dissonance is warring with physical reality, and the text just lets that messy human truth exist on the page.
It refuses to sanitize the origins of the movement. And the way the narrative proceeds makes this inclusion even more profound, I think.
Yeah.
Because if we look at verse 18, Jesus ignores the doubt entirely. He doesn't pause the gathering to perform another miracle or, prove himself further to the doubters.
He doesn't address it at all.
No, instead, he steps forward and issues the most expansive mandate in the entire gospel.
He just blows right past the hesitation. He completely ignores their internal struggle and claims, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth.
Which is massive.
It's a massive, almost incomprehensible escalation, especially when you consider what the word authority meant in first century Judea. Authority meant Rome.
The political implications of that statement are absolutely staggering. This is a direct counterclaim to Roman imperial authority.
Right.
Rome claimed ultimate jurisdiction over life, death, and the known earth. The striking irony here is that these words are spoken on an obscure Galilean hillside by a localized figure whom the empire had just executed as a state criminal.
Rome believed it had exercised its absolute authority by putting him in the ground.
Exactly. And here is that same executed figure claiming that all authority in heaven and on earth has now been transferred to him.
It is incredibly subversive. He is standing 100 miles from the Roman garrison in Jerusalem, quietly asserting that Caesar's authority is suddenly obsolete.
Obsolete, yeah.
And he follows this massive claim with the final set of commands.
Right. The text outlines a multi-part commission to go and make disciples of all nations, to baptize them, and to teach them to observe everything he commanded. Finally, he ends with a promise to be with them always, to the very end of the age.
The sheer scope of that mandate is breathtaking. I mean, the command to make disciples of all nations, it reaches far beyond the historical borders of Israel and Judea.
It steps right into the territory of the entire Roman world.
And geographically, far beyond it. He is looking at 11 exhausted men, some of whom are actively doubting what they are seeing, and he tells them to go conquer the globe through teaching and baptism.
It is a sweeping final commission.
Yeah.
And it brings us right back to our opening thought, really. This world-altering mandate was not held back until a perfect, infallible group of messengers could be assembled.
No, it wasn't.
It was handed to a fractured, traumatized group of 11 men standing on a hill, still struggling to process the reality of what they were experiencing.
The movement wasn't waiting for perfect conditions. It launched in the middle of a frantic political cover-up in the capital, fueled by physical exhaustion from a 100-mile journey, and built on the shoulders of men who were still wrestling with unresolved internal hesitation.
It's so raw.
It really is. Listening to all this, I'm so curious to hear what you all think. So drop a comment below with your thoughts on the raw historical drama and the ancient political cover-ups we discussed today.
Yeah, did the Sanhedrin's crisis PR meeting and their back channels to Pilate surprise you as much as they surprised us? Let us know.
Definitely. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
And also, make sure to check the description below for exclusive links and more resources on the sources we talked about today.
Because the text constantly reveals new layers of administrative complexity and human psychology when you look past the familiar traditional readings, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There's always more there.
There is. But this is where we have to leave it for today. Join us next time as we explore what actually happens in the next chapter of this movement based strictly on the source text.
Right, how do these followers take this sweeping final commission and push it beyond the borders of Israel and Judea?
Yeah, how do they step directly into the entire Roman world and beyond? See you then.